Hello, this is MC Stu, and today I want to go over some basic build methodology for new players. Um, I've seen a lot of questions, particularly on some of the Facebook forums and pages, with newer players asking, how can they step up their damage or survivability, or just real basic, build questions. And we've all been there. If you're a player that's been playing for a while, then some of this stuff is going to seem pretty novel to you. But when we all started playing, we all asked these same questions, and my builds were a mess. There's a lot that goes into putting these together, but there's also some real simple basics that there's nothing in the game that really tells you what to do or the best ways to go around, about putting your ships together. So, initially I'd get new parts from mission rewards or picking them up, and I just dropped in whatever had the highest quality, a little bit of this energy type, a little bit of that energy type, and really just had no idea what I was doing. And most newer players don't, and there's a good reason for that. There is no tutorial in the game that walks you through that kind of thing. There is quite a bit of info online, but a lot of what I've seen is getting older, outdated, and I just figured I would just go over some of the basics for some of the newer players, and hopefully it's helpful. So I'll do an ISA run at the end of this, so you can just kind of see what this is doing here. This is a tier 6 ship. It's nothing super special. And the first thing I should state is the ship has very little to do with the performance overall, especially when you're building up a toon, a character, and haven't entered that quote unquote end game phase, if you will. So end game would be you finished all the storylines, you're doing multiple toons, and you're doing theme builds, or you're building to tank or DPS. The sky's the limit. I mean, there was a time after playing for about a year, I thought, I've played all the content, and I've kind of conquered this game. And I started watching some streamers on Twitch like Augie or Timberwolf. There's a lot of good ones out there, Yawaski, and saw what they were doing, and I realized that I hadn't even scratched the surface. And so in any case, let's just go ahead and jump right into it here. So we have a tier 6. This is the tactical variant of this particular ship, tactical star cruiser, and it's pretty standard kind of a layout in terms of the amount of consoles for each type. It's a 4-4, pretty straightforward. So I'm going to just start with some just basic rules, because this is the main thing that I see all the time, and I made the same exact mistake myself. So you want to have all of the same energy type weapons, and you want to have all of the same energy type tactical consoles to boost the weapons. So initially, pretty much all of the different energy types have inherent procs that are built into it. So a phaser, these particular ones don't, but phaser, you can have a random chance to get a random subsystem offline. Tetrion does damage to the shields, and so I thought, well, I'll have a little Tetrion and a little bit of phaser and a little bit of all of it, so I can whittle down all those different pieces. And that was a big mistake. Basically what happened was, by mixing energy types and things like that, I wasn't able to maximize any of those. So every single weapon was doing very little damage, as opposed to having all phaser and all phaser tactical consoles boosting it. That's going to give you by far the most bang for buck in terms of your damage output. So whatever energy type you pick, and this build, I'm not saying you should copy this or is this exactly how to build the way you want to. I just put this together just to be able to illustrate some of the just basic methodology and when you're putting this together. So rule number 1 is the same energy type for all your weapons and for boosting those weapons. I am using a torpedo that does phaser damage. If I were using a quantum torpedo or something else, that would be totally fine and acceptable. I would not waste any of these slots on trying to boost that quantum torpedo, because you're just going to have one. I wouldn't recommend doing more than one torpedo unless you're doing a torpedo build, and if you're doing that, that's not something you want to probably mess with when you're newer and just getting into the game. So if this was a quantum torpedo, and let me just see if I have one that I can just throw in here. So just a photon torpedo, right? So if I were to put a console in here to boost this torpedo, 20% or whatever it does, I'm going to lose 39, 35% stacking on all of these phaser consoles. So it's just not worth it. So I'm not saying don't use a torpedo. I don't on a lot of my builds. That's personal preference. There's benefits depending on, if you're using like the plasmatic torpedo or, something like that, where you're getting damage over time, area effect, things like that. I just wouldn't do anything. Don't take up any of these console slots to boost, an individual weapon. So same energy type, and let's put that one back. Same energy type, same tactical consoles. So you can craft these consoles, you can buy them off of the exchange. I'll go over briefly in just a moment the best way I think, to upgrade your gear. The second rule is you want, and it's similar to the first rule, but you want everything to synergize or to be complementing each other as much as you can. So, for instance, and a lot of this stuff, and sorry I'm kind of jumping around, but a lot of this stuff's also mission reward, and we'll get into that. So other than this item here, everything else on this build is mission reward or can be obtained, in the game through your fleet. These are linked phasers. There's nothing special about them. You can use regular phasers. I just happen to throw these on this alt. So I could use them. I have a lot of rep gear on most of my other ones, and I have some for this particular tune as well. But I wanted to keep it simple. But you can use just regular phasers. There's nothing extra special in terms of the damage output or anything like that these do over just your standard, phasers you can craft or get off the exchange. When I'm leveling a tune or going through the storyline, I'm not even concerned either with upgrading these or putting the quality. I have been working on a new character on my free-to-play account, and most of it was green and blue. It was just whatever I could get my hands on that was a mission drop, just as long as it all matched. That's what really mattered. Once you get through the missions, you get to level 65, and you're wanting to get into maybe advanced TFOs and stuff. That's when you can start upgrading some of that stuff, or going on the exchange or crafting some of the specific things you want, and then put resources into those. I would not recommend spending resources, upgrading stuff you've gotten from drops or some of the stuff from mission rewards. There are things from mission rewards that I use on my main that does extremely high DPS and are good all the way to the end, depending on how you're building. So the space set that I'm using here, I'm using the Colony Fleet Deflector, and this is essentially for crit chance, crit severity. My other choice would have, if I wasn't going to use this, I probably would use like the Iconian or maybe just the third piece of the Bajor Defense set. Bajor Defense set, I'm using the two-piece here, the shield and the impulse engine, and I'm using both of those because the two-piece set on that, let me move this over into, gives you a phaser boost. 19% to phaser, and this is also good for plasma and disruptor. I generally, when I'm leveling a tune, especially on like a free-to-play or I'm just recommending to someone, I normally recommend going phaser only because there's a lot of free stuff that you can get to put together a decent build, to get through content, grind out resources, and apply those to whatever energy type or whatever kind of build you want to do. I just find that's the easiest way personally. Next would probably be Disruptor and then Polaron. Polaron's pretty good, depending on what you're trying to put together. So these two were chosen because they're decent and they boost my energy type. So I'm taking something that has nothing to do with weapons, and I'm being able to get a secondary bonus out of that boosts my overall build. So I'm stacking that phaser damage by going with these two. The let's see here. This is also a fleet warp core. It's pretty decent. I went with this one on this particular one because I keep my energy for, let's see here, my power settings for weapons on max, and I also like to keep my auxiliary kind of high, which I'll go into in a minute. And this particular warp core gives you a bonus from your weapons power into your engines. So I wanted to have a little bit more there. Not as important again. If I didn't have access to fleet stuff or the resources to get this, I would go probably with one of the I think it's the deuterium cores, and the reason for that is it has built into it a negative 15% power reduction for your weapon power cost. So it basically makes all of your weapons use 15% less power, which essentially equals more damage output. That's what I would recommend using. There is a mission I think that you can get that from. I'll have to look. I'll put it down in the description. So, but you can pretty much, if I could basically slap anything in here, it doesn't matter as long as it's a Mark 12, and the results on the ISA run that we do, it really wouldn't make any kind of difference. So not super important. If there was a combo between these two that gave me more resistance or shield power or something else, then I would use that, and there probably is. But again, this is what I just decided to go with on this particular build here. So these two first weapons, these come from the Phoenix boxes, and I'll go into that in a few minutes. There are weapons, upgrades, things that you can obtain that are pretty useful from that. And you can now, as of a few months back, or beginning of the year, it's been a little while, you can now get those boxes using dilithium. So you can grind those out, and I'll go into that in a minute. The rest of all of these are all the same linked phasers. The Omni in the back is a mission reward, and it's actually a part of a two-piece. So it's this weapon and this console here. This console is a great survivability console. It also gives you quite a bit of power transfer rate. So your power transfer rate would be if you put your ship into full speed here, and all of these go down. The longer you're up, the longer it takes for your power to your weapons to come back over to or come back to your weapons from your engines. Power transfer rate helps that happen faster. I don't think that's a huge deal, at least not for the way that I play. It would be if you were using it to kind of get around the map, but in most TFOs you're in combat and you can't use the full impulse anyways. So, but it's a great survivability console, and the two-piece bonus you get for this gives you additional firing cycle haste. So it's 5% firing cycle haste for all of your energy weapons. So that means everything is firing 5% faster. And it also gives you some additional flight speed. Free set, that comes from, let's see here. Future Proof has a ton of really good stuff in it. So that comes from, is it Melting Pot? No, I think it's Beyond the Nexus.
We recently received a distress signal from the USS.
Yep, Beyond the Nexus. So I generally grab these two pieces here. If you're doing a cannon build, there is a turret alternative for that as well. For the Bajor defense set that I had mentioned earlier, that comes from this mission here. I won't even try and read that. There is a three-piece set for that, and there is a warp core, which is an option that you can use to get that two-piece bonus if you wanted to do something else with some of these other slots to get some other kind of bonus. And that is also in the Phoenix store, which I'll go over, like I said, here in a moment. This is a rep piece. This is from the Omega rep. You can get this once you get to tier 1, so two days or so, and it's pretty inexpensive to get. I think it's 500 Omega marks and I think 15,000 dilithium. This console, I normally use this. There's an Omni beam that you can get from this same mission. It is a Disruptor Omni. And when you have this and the one that comes with it, which obviously I'm not using here because this isn't a disruptor build, it gives you additional crit chance. If I was doing a disruptor build, I would definitely have that disruptor Omni on there. I have this on here because it gives you additional survivability and flight turn rate. It's a very good console. I use it on quite a bit of my builds, especially when we're leveling or working our way up to the top there. And that comes also from the Future Proof Arc. Is it Future Proof? No, the New Frontiers, and I believe that comes from Brushfire.
Starfleet intelligence has learned that
Yes, it does. And the cool thing about this one here is that you get the console. You don't have to pick it, so you just get it regardless, and then you also then can pick between any of these down here. So if you're doing a disruptor build or wanted to do one later, you'll get the console by default, and then you can pick one of the other items as well. So if you're doing a disruptor build, you can run the mission just one time and get both pieces, and you're good to go, which makes that kind of nice. Next item, and I actually didn't have this on this tune, I grabbed it right before. This is an excellent console. It gives you damage resistance, hull capacity, shield capacity, and it gives you additional auxiliary power. It's an excellent survivability console. I use this on a lot of my in-game builds, and that comes from, I think it's Ragnarok. That's in the Future Proof. That's why I keep saying that. So that comes from Ragnarok Future Proof. And this I haven't even upgraded yet, and I'll upgrade that in a minute so I can show you. And let's talk a minute too about your survivability. So I've come to believe that shields really don't matter. I normally keep those at basically 0. If I had tons of shields, huge regen rates and 25,000 on my shields. If I go into a ISA or I'm fighting the Borg or some of the other races out there, you're going to find those shields disappear real quick. They drain the shields right away, and so you're left with hull. And so this hull isn't huge. A lot of my other builds that I have, it's even lower than this. But what I found really matters is your resistance. You want to have these resistances up as high as you can. I would say a minimum of 30. If you can get into the 40s, great. And there's other things you can do to boost these. So like on this build, I'm running 2 copies of polarized hull. If I do that, it really jumps these up. So I'm running 2 copies, and I'm able to keep this up, not 100% of the time, but quite a bit. So basically what we're doing with this is, you have, like on this build, we have 104,000 hit points. And your resistance, basically, when you're hit, by the enemy, the higher the resistance rating, the less points they're going to be taking away from you. So if I had, next to 0, I mean, every hit they hit me with is going to be dropping this number down quite a bit. If you can get this up, at 50%, then their damage output, basically, as it's hitting you, is only 50%, as much as it would be if you had a much lower number here. So resistance rating in terms of defense is everything. That's pretty simplistic way of putting it. I mean, if you're a tank and you're using attract fire and threatening stance and all those kinds of things, there's a lot more that goes into it, but it's less about how much hit points you have and your regen rate. In those instances, those kinds of builds, there's consoles traits, things like that just give you these huge boosts to regen and things that really don't have anything to do with your whole regen numbers. So resistance, you want it as much as you can get of that, and this is an excellent console for it, and it's free. Next console using here is the Temporal Disentanglement Suite. This is primarily for the crit chance and crit severity, but it also is a good survivability, gives you auxiliary, shield capacity, and the amount of crit chance and crit severity you get from this is based on your auxiliary levels. So I'll adjust this and you'll see the crit chance and crit severity go up and go down. So if I crank this all the way up, that jumped up 3 or 4 from where it was. If I crank it all the way down, it'll drop down quite a bit. So if I was using a faster engine or a competitive engine where the base speed doesn't matter. I would crank this up as high as I could, and the engines would be all the way down because there's other ways to go faster. And again, my shields are always as low as possible because I believe them to be basically useless. So let's readjust that down. This is also a mission reward, and this comes out of the Iconian arc from the mission Butterfly, I believe.
The research teams in the Kiana system
Butterfly.
require your assistance.
And this is also part of a three-piece set if you're doing a Tetrion build. There's some good gear in here you can get to use. This warp core is actually pretty decent as well. It's got a clicky. It'll give your bridge officers a 50% cooldown on all of their abilities. Use it once every 4 minutes. It's halfway decent free core. Next item is universal. It's the quantum phase converter. I meant to put the two-piece, so you can do a phaser and torpedo. I was going to use the phaser, and I must have just clicked something else. So that's not in here, but this is mission reward. I would get this along with the phaser. It's a free phaser. The two-piece gives you accuracy and something else. It doesn't do any kind of major synergizing, but it's a free boost, and it's a free phaser array as well. And let's just see what that does. Two-piece accuracy. Okay, so and the other one has to do with the potential of the proc for the torpedo. So if I didn't have this torpedo and I didn't want to spend any of my dilithium on the Phoenix boxes, or I had Phoenix boxes but not many, this isn't going to be like the first thing I'd go out and buy. I would probably use this three-piece. So I'd use the quantum torpedo that comes from this, the phaser, and then obviously the console. The console boosts phaser damage. So again, we're continuing to stack as much phaser damage as we can on our weapons. And that comes from Future Proof as well, and Sunrise. So here's the torpedo console, and there's also a cannon variant of that if you're doing a cannon build as well. But I do have this phaser. I meant to put it on just for the example, but like I said, I misclicked or something. But in any case, free phaser. Nothing special about it. I would lose it after, if I had some of these laying around, which I do, or there's quite a bit of other better stuff. But again, for free, I'll take it until I have something better. This is comes from Lockbox. You can buy it on the exchange. It's varied in price greatly. Right now, it's about $8 million. It's kind of expensive. This isn't a make or break. We could take this off, and it wouldn't make a huge difference whatsoever. It's got a nice clicky where it puts an agony field around your enemy for a certain amount of time. I think it does phaser damage to them, and then it boosts your phasers a little bit and gives you some crit chance. There are some other items you could use that are free. I just didn't have any on this tune, so I just went with this. But so this is at the moment 7 or 8 million. So if you're looking at this build and you're like, man, I don't want to spend $8 million for this, I wouldn't. There's other stuff you could put in there. I could leave this out and not even use it, and it wouldn't make a big difference on the run. But that's what I had, so I just slotted it in there. And we already went over the tactical consoles. It's easy because rule number 1 is match your energy types. Let's look at, so I'll just go over some of this stuff, like the traits. Some of this stuff I've spent some money on grinding it out, doing Tour of the Galaxy, making, EC, and then buying it on the exchange. These will vary in price. And you can just kind of take a look at the descriptions. I'm not going to really go into big detail on these, because this is stuff I've been buying to get this character to end game. And if you're wanting to look into that, there's other videos and better tutorials on that. Augmented Dictator Gaming, he does a lot of high-end builds, and I definitely check him out. As for the traits, all three, these two traits are both from the specializations. So on this one, I'm running Miracle Worker. There's not exactly a rhyme or reason. This is an old tune I had that I just didn't use a lot. And back then I thought to myself, I'm going to do Miracle Worker. There was really no reason for it. That's just what I have. It's not even done on that. But I do have it half done, so I have the standard trait and then strategist, and that's where these two traits come from. So this gives you a damage bonus boost. This gives you additional healing. This trait here is from the Arbiter T6 variant, so this is from a paid ship. If you're looking at buying ships, there's always a debate where, I hate spending $30 or $24 if it's on sale to buy a ship just for its trait. There's some ships I really wanted. I love the way it looks. It's an awesome ship. But it just looks cool. I mean, it basically has the same layout, and the trait it has doesn't do anything for me. It's kind of a struggle because, you don't want to just spend money on ships to, unlock the traits and then never use them again. The Arbiter is one, though, where it's a great ship. You can do cannon builds, beam builds. It's a good all-around ship, and the trait that it has is the emergency weapons cycle. And this is, if you're going to play this game long-term, work towards in-game builds, unless you're running a torpedo only, no beam cannon weapons, you must have this trait, and this is just a basic building block to being able to do a good amount of damage. The last trait on here, Honor Dead, this comes from a Klingon ship that's not available to Fed characters, so you can buy this on the exchange, and it tends to be pretty cheap. I've seen it as low as 500 and as high as 3 million. So either way, pretty inexpensive. Even at 3 million, you could grind that out in 4 days and buy this. This basically gives you stacking, damage resistance, and boosts your survivability. So that's why that's in there. I'll just quickly go through these. 4% crit chance, crit severity, based on auxiliary power, gives you additional bonus damage and accuracy, and then again bonus weapons damage. So that is that in a nutshell. Stations. Again, I see a lot of people asking too, should I do fire at will? Should I do beam overload? This is my opinion. Like I said, I just leveled up a tune over the last month. I used beam overload, and I really think you just can't beat it. Fire at will is good. It attracts tons of attention. So if you're going into an ISA, and even if you're not putting out tons of damage, if you're hitting multiple ships at a time, they're all going to pay more attention to you and start shooting you. And it doesn't do as much damage as even just your beams firing with no ability going. So fire at will actually, it hits multiple targets, but it does less damage to each target, as if, compared to if you were just shooting one individual target. Beam overload does a ton of damage. This was changed at the beginning of the year. It used to be when you click this, you essentially got one beam overload shot. Now it continually fires a beam overload shot for 10 seconds, and it deals 4 times the amount of damage. So it's my go-to if I'm doing beams. It doesn't seem as fun. It's nice when your ship's just spraying, weapons fire out at every angle. I know that looks and feels good, but it's not doing as much damage, and you're attracting a lot more threat. So if you have a build that needs help, and and that's why you're watching this video, and you're using fire at will, and you're going in and you're clicking that, and next thing you know, the ship's spraying all this firepower out, but then 10 seconds later you're dead. That's why. So there is a place for fire at will, but in the current state of the game, fire at will is for specific applications, tanking, things like that. Or I use it on a torpedo build, but that's because of the trait that comes from the Gargaren ship. When you use fire at will, it gives you an extra torpedo spread. And so, again, totally different thing, but I would stick with beam overload. That is going to give you the most damage, and it's going to generate the least amount of threat overall for you. Torpedo spread, because I have torpedoes. I'd like to have torpedo too, but Having attack pattern beta is definitely more important than that. This upgrades your weapons so that your enemies have minus 30 all damage resistance. We talked about damage resistance earlier. In terms of your own damage resistance, that same thing works in the other direction. If you can lower the enemy's damage resistance by 30, that's huge. Attack pattern beta is a must. In fact, if this ship only had 2 tactical slots, an ensign and lieutenant, it would have beam overload 1 and it would have attack pattern beta. Attack pattern beta 1 is only available in the lieutenant slot. So, but I would give up having beam overload 2 and go with 1 just so I could have beta in here. Not a big fan of tactical team, but didn't have anything else to put there, so I just filled that slot with it. It doesn't hurt. Talked a little bit about polarized hull. So this gives you plus 46 on damage resistance for 15 seconds. You'll notice when I click that, it doesn't actually give me 46. There is a diminishing return on damage resistance. So if you were to go through all the different things that are boosting damage resistance and add up all the numbers to that, they are not going to add up to what actually shows on your ship. I don't know why that is, but that is the case. But in any case, the most that you can, the more you can get, the better. Hazard emitters for heal over time, and then Photonic Officer is a must-have. I made a separate video on this just specifically. Essentially, what this does is it cools down all your bridge officer abilities except for Photonic Officer by 3 seconds. And I'll refer you over to the video I did on that for the detail. But essentially, in a nutshell, most people look at it and say, "Oh, 3%, big deal." The cooldown's 45 seconds. It doesn't matter. Well, it's 3% every second. So, if you had, let's say, 10 seconds left, that's going to give you 3 seconds off of that. Now, that decreases as that cooldown, gets smaller because it's a percentage of what's left of it. But basically, I keep that running constantly, and that'll cool down your, especially your firing ability modes, quite a bit faster. In fact, if I click beam overload and then Photonic Officer, you'll kind of see the numbers kind of skip ahead a little bit. They just will move a little bit faster here and there. But basically, you can get those to cool down about 16 seconds or so most of the time, as long as you don't have any kind of misfiring of that. So Photonic Officer is a must. Without it, you're going to be waiting for the full cooldowns unless you have copies of that. And again, that's a whole different discussion from what we're going over. So I would just definitely recommend this is a must-have in terms of science capability. I'll link the video I did on Photonic Officer. That's the science up there. I use 2 copies here, so I guess I'll just jump into this real quick. I have them spread out on this bar here, but you'll notice when I click this, the cooldown for this one is actually going to be longer than this one. So there's what's called a global cooldown. So if I use this, you can't use them both at the same time, but that's 45 seconds and this is 30 seconds. And so if I also am using this is going to get done in about 15, 16 seconds or so. And this ability lasts for 15 seconds. So using both of them with Photonic Officer keeps it up almost 100% of the time. Where you run into the issue is Photonic Officer takes 30 seconds to recharge, but it's only giving you that extra 3% per second cooldown for 20 seconds. So you do have 10 seconds of this not doing anything while it's cooling down. But that's just the nature of the game and the build. If you could have everything up full time all the time, I guess it just wouldn't really be fun after a short amount of time. This I didn't have anything else to put here, so I just put energy siphon, just get me some more power. If this wasn't here, it wouldn't make any difference whatsoever on the run that I did. If it did, it would be negligible. Emergency power to engines, so we can go faster. This also cools down the evasive maneuvers. I'll go into that. I'll come back to that in a minute. Reverse shield polarity. This is a good heal, damage resistance ability. And then emergency power to weapons. This gives you 16% bonus damage. So there's a difference between they call it Cat 1 and Cat 2. So anything that you see that says bonus in it, what that does, so let's go back over to the ship here. So this weapon right here, its base, it does 1377.3 phaser damage. That is with all of these consoles boosting it. If I got rid of all of these consoles and pulled them out, this weapon base is probably closer to like 600. So when I add one of these consoles back in, this is 39%. It's going to give me plus 39% of the base amount of this weapon, the base being that 600. So no consoles, no nothing. When I add another console in, let's just say this one, and it's 35%, it's going to give me 35% again of the base, not of the base plus this other one that we already added. So every time I add one in, it's only giving you this percentage of the base damage of this weapon. When you are able to have a boost that's bonus damage, so there are some consoles in sets that'll give you bonus, it is going to give you a bonus of all of your Cat 1 stuff added to this. So if it was say a 5% boost, you would get 5% on that 1377 damage, which actually is going to be a lot more than the 39% of the Cat 1 or non-bonus damage that you would get from this console, because it is only on the base damage of this weapon. And again, the base damage being what it would come with if you're sitting on the ground with it not on your ship, whatever it said, which is a lot lower than what it says now because it's being boosted. So in any case, bonus damage is quite a bit more than what you get from your Cat 1 or your just standard boost consoles. So using the highest level you can get of this, which is the 3, it's what I'm using here. Even if I only had one, engineering slot, it would be this, because it's going to put out quite a bit extra. And I've done tests before. Basically 16% bonus damage is literally like having 3 epic phaser tactical boost consoles. It's like 3 of them that are going to run for 30 seconds. And with Photonic Officer running, we're able to keep this up almost full time. And I don't want to get too into the weeds here, but that ability also is what boosts or procs makes this guy go here. So it gives you 50% off of your power cost for weapons. So you're going to do quite a bit more damage, because when you start firing your weapon, especially under beam overload, you're going to see this bar dropping down some, which means you're doing less damage. You won't have that when you run this, because it's going to make this activate here. This also will make your weapons fire 20% faster for the 30 seconds. So when you're running Photonic Officer with emergency power to weapons, you are being able to have all your weapons fire at 50% less power draw and 20% faster pretty much all the time. So you can see how things kind of synergize together. We're beam overload, emergency power to weapons. We want it all to cool down faster. And just by clicking those 3 buttons, this weapon here is doing 23,000, and it was actually higher than that a second ago. I'll click it again so we can. So under beam overload, this weapon's doing 9,993, almost 10,000 phaser damage. And this stuff isn't epic. This is all just crafted basic stuff. That is a ton of damage. You're not going to get that with fire at will. I'll tell you that right now. Okay, let's keep moving along here. And then we have auxiliary powered structural integrity. This is a good hull heal, and that's why I have that there. What else? let's look at duty officers here, because that'll finish up our stations that we're using. So, and this will also lead me into the upgrades and Phoenix stuff. So this guy right here comes from the Phoenix boxes, and I'll pull that up here in a minute. But basically, anytime that you activate emergency power to engines, it will give you an automatic cooldown on your evasive maneuvers. So let's just do that. Let's click it. The countdown that's happening right now is saying that you have that high speed. Once that gets to 0, then now your ship has slowed back down and your 45-second cooldown. If I then click emergency power to engines, that is already ready to use again. Now I can use it again, but I'm still having to wait for this cooldown. But if Photonic Officer is going, that cooldown is going to happen much faster, in just about under 20 seconds. So between these two, you'll be able to move your ship around the map pretty quickly and fast. So always keep Photonic Officer going, and it cools everything down. So I mean, if you click all your bridge officer abilities, so right now it's at the 10 seconds where it's not doing anything, so all this stuff is cooling down at a regular speed. But as soon as I click it again, anything that even was already running will now start cooling down faster. So always keep Photonic Officer running. The rest of this stuff is just things I got from drops or the exchange. It's none of it's real special. 50% chance, yeah. So I have a couple in here that reduces beam weapon abilities. So beam overload, 50% chance if I activate beam overload to give me 5 seconds off of that. So additional cooldown. The more we can keep these abilities up, the more damage you're going to do. So nothing real special here. Duty officers are important, but again, when you're first starting out and just putting together a basic build, just make sure you're picking things that do something for your build. So start with your build that we've gone over, same energy type, things that are stacking or boosting something else, synergizing together, and then just look through the free ones they give you, or if you find cheap ones on the exchange, things that are going to directly boost stuff. There's some things out there, and it's like 5% chance if this happens, then this might happen, and that stuff ends up being a waste. I mean, anything that you can find that has a high percentage of happening, 50% is actually really, really high. I was actually surprised when I was looking at this tune, but if it's at 15, 20, 30%, those are good odds. 2.5%, 5%, that's a waste. And that's why I really like this guy here, because this is 100%. It just cools this down. If I click this, there is no chance associated. So that's always obviously better. So that's duty officers. So let's talk about how we get the duty officer and some of the stuff in the Phoenix store. I find a lot of people are unaware of this. This used to be an event. During the event, you could buy the boxes with dilithium, and you could get one free a day. But it was only during those events, and those events came up 2-3 times a year, maybe 4 times a year. Now you can get them anytime, and let me just slide my screen over here so you can see. So I have a really wide monitor, and it's not conducive to recording all of it. So if you go to the dilithium store here, and forgive my inventory, it's a mess. This tune, generally I use them just to sell things and hold stuff, so it's kind of a disaster. But okay, special items. So here's your Phoenix boxes. You can buy 1 for 45, or you can buy 10 for 40. That's obviously the best bang for buck, so let's just go ahead and do that. So I'm going to start opening these. They'll start populating right here. So we got a rare, got another rare, very rare, uncommon. Okay, I'm just gonna blow through these. So if you get an epic, if I got an epic right there, you'd hear me screaming out in happiness, but I did not, and that's okay. Let me scoot this back over, and then we'll take a look at those. Okay. Oh, there's that rare. Okay. I already had some in the inventory. Okay, so if I click on any of these, it'll open up the Phoenix store here. We'll just click on the best one that I have. Okay, and so it dropped us into the Epic tab. So basically, these vouchers you can buy. You can use one to buy one thing that match any of these areas. So for instance, we have some very rares here. Let's look in the very rare tab. So if you get an Epic, you can get yourself some nice ships. You can get some semi-nice ships. They're tier 6, but they're T5Us is what they are. So they're basically tier 6 ships, but they don't have traits or any kind of specialization seating or anything like that. So here's the very rare. Some of this stuff's grayed out because I already have it. But a lot of this stuff is pretty decent. Anti-proton build, if you're doing that, this would be a good console. Anti-proton energy torpedo, not bad. Some of this stuff is it's okay. You got to upgrade it to get it from being the very or the rare to being better, but some of it comes as very rare. So here's the Bajor Defense Warp Core. So we were looking at that earlier. So for instance, we could use, say, 2 pieces of the Iconian set from the mission reward, maybe these 2 items here, and then use the Warp Core here and keep the shields. We'd still get that boost, and then we could use something else here to get a set bonus. But in any case, this 3-piece you can get with the deflector from the mission reward. If you want the full 4-piece set, it comes from the Phoenix store here. Here's the torpedo that I'm using on that build, and then I'm also using the prolonged engagement phaser array on that build. Both of these items I actually got from the event when they first came out, and so a lot of this stuff that's in here are things that came originally from a 2-week event or whatever, like the Kobayashi Maru we're doing now, and they've put it into this store. In the rare tab, this is where you can get the duty officer to recharge your evasive maneuvers using emergency power to engines. I put this on everything. If you're wanting to put out damage or you're wanting to save your life, getting away fast or getting over to the next group of bad guys to be able to engage right away, you got to be able to move the ship fast, and this is really invaluable. I am also using this guy here. It's not a big deal on this particular build, but on some of the high-end builds, every little bit adds up. So this guy here, he's actually a ground duty officer. I'm getting a little off subject, but and what he does is he gives you 5% all damage versus the Borg. So a lot of us run the ISA maps, and the Borg stuff is kind of what you use to parse. So the nice thing is you can slot him in the ground, or you can only slot him in the ground, but the boost, it gives you the 5% all damage boost on both space and on ground maps. So on some of the higher DPS tunes that I use, I have the 6th slot here unlocked, so I have 6, but then I actually have 7 because I'm able to slot this guy in the ground area. But in any case, that's where you can get these from. There's some other kind of cool stuff. There's some costume stuff in here. A lot of it's like most of these other duty officers I haven't found a use for. Admiralty, if you're running that for dilithium for your fleet or whatever, there's some pretty decent Admiralty cards you can get in here. I buy a lot of these boxes because when you get down here to the uncommon, you can trade in uncommon for Phoenix upgrades. These are the best upgrades you can get. When you do all the math, one of these, let's say you just bought one Phoenix box and it cost you the 4,500 dilithium, and you opened it and you got an uncommon. With one of these, and I'll buy 5 of them. With one of those, you are able to upgrade an item, and I'll do that now, with no dilithium cost. So basically, if you only bought one box and you only got a green one, you about break even compared to using regular upgrades that you can craft or get off the exchange. But if you open a couple boxes, or the one box that you do open, say, is a very rare, you can trade in a very rare for 2 uncommons. Now you can get 2 Phoenix upgrades. So you get 51,200 upgrade points with no dilithium cost. And let's see here. And then if you wanted to, get to the next quality level, you could just keep going with that. I think I only have 4 left, so I doubt that's going to happen, but let's just do it. I got the worst luck with this. I've had them at like 50% before and still wasn't popping. So let's put that back on the ship. So if you did, let's say you just bought 1 box and you got a blue one, and you wanted upgrades, then you can basically, let's say you got a purple one here. You can trade a purple one in for 2 of the blue ones, and then those 2 blue ones break down into 2 each. And this is kind of confusing because I already have a bunch in here, but so I had 2 from that one, and then when I come down to the bottom, we have a total of 8 we can get. So basically, if you got 2 of these very rares, you could break those all the way down and get 8 of those Phoenix upgrade boxes. Phoenix upgrade. And let's see here. We'll get a couple more. No, we'll get a bunch more. So as you can see, I mean, that means every, 5 days you can get yourself 10 boxes. And if you get the same kind of results that I got, and I can't remember how many I got of what, but basically I probably would be ending up with 15 or 16 of those Phoenix upgrades. That's a lot of upgrade points. So you could see, if you're grinding out the dilithium, you're refining your 8,000 a day. Over the course of a week or so, you could upgrade almost your whole ship. I wouldn't do all that until you're sure what you have is working together good and synergizing together, but that's the best way right now to do upgrades and upgrade your gear. Let's see, am I missing anything? So I just decided just to kind of throw this video together here late at night, and so I apologize if I'm rambling or all over the place. I think that covers everything. So again, number 1 rule, same energy type. If you're going to do a torpedo, 1 torpedo, do not waste any other resources in terms of slots or anything on boosting that torpedo, because it is not going to give you the kind of bang for buck if you just use those boosts for the primary damage type, which in this case is phaser. And this torpedo, like I said, it actually does phaser damage, so it's kind of a moot point on this, and that's why I used it. But if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the comments. Be more than happy to answer any questions I can. Like I said, this is really for newer players, people with just some basic questions. I just wanted to put out, some of that basic build methodology, try and help, your play experience be funner. If you're looking for more high-end stuff, I would definitely check out Augmented Dictator Gaming. His stuff's badass, and he's putting up. You'll see on this run that I will do here in just a second. I did the run before I did all the talking here, so I think I did around 40, 47, 50, something like that, K DPS through an ISA run. My best on my main tune is, I think, right about 400. Augmented's doing 500. That's extreme, and just for some reference, if you're doing 20 in an ISA, you're not making anybody upset, you're helping the team, you're doing good, and you're in the top 20-30% in terms of your ship's performance. If you're getting 50, 60, 70, 100, you're having tons of fun, and you're doing very well. So anyways, I will keep talking if I don't stop now. So thank you guys for watching. If you have any questions, let me know. Give me a subscribe and follow. I appreciate it. Thanks, guys.
You